Murphy, town planner. He's behind the maps, but if y'all know Miles, these would be the people you want to come and myself come catch up with and say hello and tell us your perspective and your ideas afterwards. But I just want to kind of roll through the high points first so we can kind of get oriented and then maybe split up and get your perspectives and learn more about what you're concerned about. And if you're on the steering committee that helped with this plan, would you please raise your hand? All right, good showing from the steering committee. Thank you. So those are also people that would be that you could get some more perspective if you have some. And I hope you all signed in and were able to get one of those comment sheets, and you can either drop that off tonight or you can keep it and drop it off tomorrow. And then of course there's the website, and we've been collecting the responses that have come through the website. And we're going to look at all those kind of together at the end and make sure we get everyone's perspective that we can that submits one. Let me also mention there are 3 printouts of the plan kind of around. We had those kind of for reference, but you can also pick one up and read it, but please leave it here so we have it for the next group of people at 5:45. This plan update is happening for several reasons. One is that because of legislation passed at the federal level in 1975, the state now has a Coastal Resources Commission and the Coastal Area Management Act, which you'll hear me call CAMA without remembering that I need to say all 4 words at once. And they require a land use plan for all the municipalities and counties in the 20 coastal counties in North Carolina. So one of the reasons we have a land use plan is that that's required in order to get those CAMA permits that we need for small and large projects, whether it's dredging the inlet or maintaining the marina or getting a dock or maintaining a pier or anything along those lines, or building a bulkhead or a seawall. The other reason we plan, though, is because it lets us come together as a community, like we are tonight, have a conversation about where we are, what we value, what we want to make our priorities moving forward, and then gives a tool that the staff can use and the town leadership can use and decision makers can use to measure new ideas that come before them and to gauge support for and desire for changes in the way that the town's moving forward. So that's what I like to think of as the real purpose of a plan, is to have that discussion and kind of get the community's temperature and write those things down and then have a roadmap for moving forward to accomplish our goals as a community. This process started back in October, and it's probably going to wrap up in August. So it's been kind of a long process. Well, it's been actually probably about exactly the right amount of time process, to be honest, because it does take a while. It's had a lot of public involvement. From the start, we had a full day of interviews with, I think, 2 or 3 or 4 dozen stakeholders, different members of different focus groups, if you will, in the community to understand their perspectives. Steering committee input throughout, the website, social media, and outreach from the town. The first public open house workshop was in February, and this is the follow-up one to kind of make sure that what we heard at that first public open house workshop has been reflected in the plan, and if it hasn't, we need to get that input and make sure that we make those changes. And then it'll go to the elected and appointed boards for their review and comment and decision ultimately. And then it'll be reviewed by the Coastal Resources Commission to make sure it meets the requirements of a CAMA land use plan. So like I said, it started with the stakeholders and a tour of the community and getting to understand the challenges and the constraints in the area. And these were kind of the themes that kind of emerged from that. We had almost 500 respondents to the survey, the public online survey. It started at the end of January and wrapped up after the public meeting in mid-February. And from there, we got kind of a good idea about what people value and kind of general directions, kind of a broad stroke approach to what people valued and wanted to see moving forward. The steering committee has been meeting regularly for almost the last year. They've been spending a lot of their own time to get to review all this information and vet it and then provide direction when direction was needed. The websites had a lot of views from a lot of different people. And from there, you can see a lot of the background information and comment on the plan and the work products. And then from the beginning, public input has shaped really all the aspects of the plan. And we try and make sure that what we're delivering today is what the community is looking for to guide them moving forward. You can see right here is actually a GIS suitability analysis that was performed based on a lot of different physical and economic characteristics of land. They kind of look at whether or not it's suitable for basically urbanization. This isn't the only data point that was used in constructing the future land use map, but it was one of many. So there's a little bit of science, there's a little bit of, there's a lot of public involvement, and then there's a lot of steering and guidance and existing knowledge and building on the efforts from previous plans. Public open house, by all accounts, was a success. Back in February, we had a lot of people show up and spend a lot of time getting to look at stuff and providing input. This is just one example of the kind of the maps were created, looking at destinations, flooding concerns, and areas to prioritize future growth. We vetted the community vision and goals. That's captured on that first board right there as you come in. And it kind of builds on the efforts of the previous CAMA plan to a large extent, but also was massaged a little bit and kind of brought up to date to be more current and reflective of the community as it is. But for the most part, these goals and the vision have not changed too much. And that's pretty typical you find in a lot of communities, is that the values of the community generally are pretty much on a solid course. So I want to orient you quickly to the future land use map. That's that really big map in the center of the room. It basically has a number of character areas, and a future land use map is something that's used to guide the intensification of development. It kind of communicates the public, the community's priorities for infrastructure investment, activity centers. It helps communicate to the private sector where the public sector anticipates seeing the infrastructure to support higher density development or lower density development. And I want to run real quick just through a couple of the kind of areas that kind of pop out. Well, first I guess I should explain the areas. So kind of the light yellow, and then the kind of the orange color, which is a little bit lighter orange over there. And then even this kind of like the darker brown color that you kind of see back in here and around the downtown area are residential. The pinks and purples are kind of a commercial, sometimes a mix of commercial and residential or retail or offices. The blue is kind of employment and office uses, so a little bit less, no residential, more office and employment. And then the light green you're going to see is kind of the marina areas, and then the dark green is going to be more recreation, outdoor, passive recreation, civic, and open space. And so it includes things like the lake park, the parking lot that the town owns down next to the marina, the wetlands and the state park and the Matsu buffer area, and then the beaches, of course. And then the area all within the sound, which is used for recreation. So in terms of residential areas, they go from kind of a lower intensity to a higher intensity, and it does suggest a mix of attached and detached as you get into those higher intensity residential areas. The commercial and mixed use areas kind of pay homage to the downtown business district. Mixed use commercial is kind of a more intense, and you want to think about like the Publix or the Food Lion is kind of like the more intense commercial areas. And then kind of a neighborhood commercial, which is a little bit lower intensity uses in certain locations. So it might be kind of the little business at the end of your street that maybe you walk down to and get ice cream or walk past. Maybe has some small office use. And then we kind of have these employment and special use areas that don't really fit in either of those two buckets, but still serve an important role in the community, whether that's employment centers, recreation and conservation civic areas. The marina is definitely a special use. And then the Gateway Corridor overlay, which was all along Lake Park Boulevard, there was a strong desire expressed to kind of, since that is kind of the primary gateway to the town, to kind of increase the aesthetics and maybe the pedestrian facilities and kind of focus a little bit more on that in terms of having a little bit nicer appearance. So that's kind of what you see in the Lake Park Boulevard area, is you'll see kind of the Food Lion, kind of the Publix and the areas across the street. In between, kind of that lower intensity commercial, neighborhoods in the back and neighborhoods along the water here. And then the green is potentially future marina. And the future land use map is not a description of what's on the ground. It's not going to rezone anybody's property for them. It's not going to downzone anybody's property. And it's not going to make any property develop. What it is one data point that the council can use when they are considering rezonings or land use policy decisions. It is not the only piece of information that they will use, but it is one piece, and it tells them the last time we checked in with the community, this is what the community thought would be a good vision for us 10, 20, 30 years from now. On the north end, the land use map kind of suggests that lower intensity residential along the sound and on the point, and then where you're a little bit more out of the floodplain, kind of that medium density residential, which is more or less what you already see there. So really what this is kind of saying on the north end is, let's just kind of keep this the way it is. It's doing pretty good. And because of different things that are still being addressed and need to be, like for instance, the flooding on Canal Drive, that maybe we don't need to intensify any development here for a little bit. And it respects a little bit of commercial that's down there on the pier, entrance to Freeman Park, and then a little commercial right here in the middle. Forgive me, but I had to make up a title for this, and I called it the core neighborhood. I couldn't think of anything else. So this is kind of what I think is kind of recognized as the real residential, family-oriented character of the beach town, of the Carolina Beach. There was a lot of comment about wanting to preserve the family-oriented character of Carolina Beach, and it being a family town and community. So this kind of respects that. There is a fairly large property here that is still greenfield, and kind of the thought there is that you would have these tie-ins, and if it doesn't develop as a larger campus or some sort of really master planned one unit all at once, if it goes piece by piece, the thought would be that it would kind of tie into the existing neighborhood through these kind of major east-west connections, and then it would have some sort of commercial type uses along the front, low intensity uses, and then kind of a more medium density neighborhood in the back, which is to say 6,000 to 9,000 square foot lots, which is like what you see up in this area and over here on Cape Fear Boulevard closer in. The Central Business District is obviously a very important character area here. It's very unique. It's probably hard to find anything like that anywhere else along the coast. And this kind of protects that, and then also allows there to be a mix of commercial and residential around it to kind of support those commercial uses and give them customers and give visitors a place and a destination to be, which is an excellent marriage. And that's kind of the interesting thing about this mixed-use commercial, this darker purple one, is that in areas, I know it's very difficult in Carolina Beach to keep a piece of property on the beach side commercial, because people want to live on the beach, and so they want to make it into condos or whatever, what have you. But that's kind of the beauty of this right here, is that you'll have the boardwalk with the commercial uses that are there and the active uses on the ground floor. And then around that, and maybe even above the boardwalk, you'll have those residences and those vacation rentals that people want to be at. And then as you get this dark purple further back up Lake Park Boulevard, where you have the Publix and the Food Lion, there's not really as much a high residential demand there. So those areas will kind of naturally gravitate with the market toward more commercial uses. But this is obviously a big recreation district. On the south end, it seems like there are kind of three real nodes here, basically built around the larger hotel and condo developments. And the future land use map does show, you may be able to see just a little bit of brown on the back side of these, and that brown would be more of that attached multi-story apartments and condos type use, which would kind of focus around those larger public parking areas, good beach access, and kind of a little activity center, but a kind of a small scale activity center. And for the most part, that purple area is really drawn right around those condos and those hotels at that point. And then also they kind of have nice access along Ocean Boulevard especially. Nice access, goes all the way back to Dow Road, and kind of gives a little neighborhood center in those little areas. I want to go through the recommendation, quick overview of the policy recommendations. Those are on the boards around here, and those really make up the bulk of the report, of the plan. They're kind of in the last half of the plan. The CAMA plan format is pretty rigid. This is a state-prescribed planning exercise, and it was written a few decades ago, so it's not exactly the most fluid and easy to change. So we kind of have to stick to their format for the most part, but does have this great bucket called local issues of concern, which is where a lot of the more locally specific things fall into. But for the most part, the CAMA plans are interested in maximizing public access to public trust waters, right? And they're interested in public trust waters are, for those of you that don't know, the beach, any basically navigable waterway, basically. So the beach, the sound, intracoastal. Land use compatibility, so they're interested in balancing environmental concerns with economic and safety concerns. Infrastructure carrying capacity, to make sure that we protect our AECs, and that means areas of environmental concern, and those are laid out in CAMA pretty specifically, but more or less you could say that it's areas that are highly erodible, like between the dune and the water. Anything that has salt water, where salt water meets the land, right? So any salt marsh, coastal wetlands, saltwater wetlands, and they want to conserve beaches and floodplains and dunes for storm protection in particular, and they want to protect and enhance the public trust water quality. And so this is all based on the presumption from the federal level that oceans and estuarine systems have a value above and beyond their private land use value, a value to the public that needs to be protected, right? And let me just say too, before we move on, that really the whole basis of planning, the whole support, why planning exists and why even regulation of land use or building codes exists in the first place, is from the words protecting the public health, safety, and welfare. And so welfare can mean a few different things. It can mean private property values. It can mean local government, fiscal health. It can mean a lot of things. But safety and health and safety are pretty fundamental. So it's really it really comes down to those three things. And that's where ultimately any regulation from the local government really needs to hang its for zoning and land use and public land use policy really hangs its hat on those three things: public health, safety, and welfare. And that's where that power derives from. So in terms of public access, the main thrusts of the plan are to maintain the marina operations, improve water and beach access, and remain open to opportunities for new public access points. So this plan is not advocating taking land. It's not advocating condemning land, but it is advocating that the town remain open to those opportunities when they present themselves. This town actually has great access to the beach. There's almost a CAMA access point at every street end, just about. But there are some opportunities maybe for better access on the sound. Some people mention a little kayak or canoe launch or something like that. And then the state park has pretty good access to the backside as well. In terms of land use compatibility, we want to make sure that the land use plan gets used as a data point when we consider rezonings and land use policy decisions. We're still looking for solutions to the flooding on Canal Drive, and want to maximize Carolina Beach Lake for stormwater control. It really is the nicest stormwater pond you'll ever see. It's a beautiful facility. And then maintain Freeman Park operations, and I know that's been a little bit difficult, but I think it sounds like the town is on top of it and working through everything they can there. Town's also making sure that when they need to get a CAMA permit for expanding water and wastewater facilities, that they have that in this plan as well, so we can make sure that any expansion of the wastewater treatment plant and any new wells are accounted for. There's a lot of talk about public parking and possibly the alternatives to regular automobile parking, so golf cart parking, since they're kind of a part of the community. Natural hazard areas are a big concern. For the most part, what you can see right here, it's maintain the inlet and snows cut. Those are identified as key resources to the community. Continue to use public funds to combat erosion on the beach side. Identify current and future high hazard areas. Don't allow development to continue to intensify in vulnerable areas. Require additional structure elevation. And I like to point out now right here that up in the Outer Banks, several different towns and the county and the local home builders association are actually collaborating to establish a minimum structure elevation that's above that required by FEMA, because they want to make sure that they are protected the next time a storm comes in and they can get back up and running faster and have less damage. So, FEMA sets the bare minimums, but we can always do better than the bare minimums. And then continue in the community rating system, which results in lower flood insurance premiums in the town, as well as the hazard mitigation plan, which is a regional effort at this point. Oh, let me point this out too. I know there was a lot of concern about this expansion of the inlet hazard area. I did bring the report that this came from. It's from the Division of Coastal Management. They did a study last year, and they're proposing to expand the inlet hazard areas in some places. This is one of them. This report is for every inlet up and down the coast. I only brought the one for Carolina Beach. I just printed out those pages instead of the other 50 or 60 pages. But that's the Division of Coastal Management, and from what my understanding is that they're going to be taking that information to their board for approval in March. So between now and then, I think I'm not exactly sure about how that process is working. That's not our process, and we didn't draw those lines. They're based on scientific measurements and projections of erosion along that area. So if you're concerned, I would encourage you, that report I think might be on that podium right there. You might want to snap a shot of the cover, and then you can look it up on the internet and find out more about it. Oh, it's right there. Christy has it right there. So it's back there on that big table. In terms of water quality, it looks like the best wetlands in town are actually behind Freeman Park, so we want to continue to protect those. Increase the standards for stormwater management. The town did dredge the lake recently and install bigger pumps to help maintain stormwater better, but Henniker's Ditch and the maintenance they've done there are helping in terms of like regional stormwater management, but there's also an opportunity for everybody really to have a little bit more strict stormwater management. There's a lot of concern. I think people were saying that when some of the lots that are left over redevelop or build, they're shunting stormwater under their neighbors. And so that combined with stormwater pipes that maybe weren't sized the way that we're getting rain now are a concern moving forward. And then in terms of specifically local concern, there was one of our steering committee members did an informal Facebook poll, and bury the electric lines got way at the top of the list right away. So that's in the plan. Continue to bury electric lines. Make Lake Park Boulevard more aesthetically pleasing. Enhance bicycle, pedestrian, golf cart transportation options. That was a big thrust. The town has a great pedestrian plan, and they've been implementing it really well and making a lot of progress. But when we first started here, I would have sworn Carolina Beach had probably more miles of greenway and sidewalk projects per capita than anywhere else in the state, because they had the greenway underway, and then the one on not Clarendon Avenue, but Cape Fear Boulevard, I believe, was just been finished up. A lot about the family-oriented characters. We want to protect that, and the plan does recommend evaluating short-term rentals and potentially regulating them. There's a lot of different ways and different flavors for that. Obviously, short-term rentals and vacation rentals are part of the economy, and so it's important to take a close look at that if you're going to regulate them and make sure that you get that mix right. So this plan is not saying do one thing or the other. It's saying here's a menu of options, and it probably needs further study if you want to protect the family-oriented character. Because there's some places like in Duck where the whole neighborhood is short-term rentals, and maybe one person lives there year-round, maybe. And every week they have different neighbors, you know. So vacation homes in Carolina Beach have doubled since 2000, 2010. What is it, 2000? Since 2000. So about almost half of the homes are vacational, seasonal, or rental homes at this point, according to the census. So now would be kind of the time to get ahead of that if you were interested in that. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Your time's valuable, and we want to make sure we can hear everything you have to say. There's some upcoming public events. Again, the Planning Board Council meeting on the 8th, where we'll probably have taken your comments, incorporated them, and brought them back to them for review and recommendation. And then the council hearing is tentatively scheduled for the 10th. That may change. Obviously, it's at the will of the council. But that would be to conclude the hearing and begin with adoption. And so before we break out to the tables and to hear more of what y'all have to say, are there any general questions about process or before we move to specific questions? Well, thank you very much. My name is Jay McLeod. I'm going to go stand right over there. Christy's right over there. Kathia's right over there. Miles is in the back, and Jeremy is right there. Please feel free to wander around, grab us, talk to us. Let us know what you think.
Said somebody come up after and say, questions I was going to ask me anything like that.
Right, absolutely. No, we opened up kind of a general process question answer, and then we went back and talked to everyone one-on-one. Oh, tonight, yes.
Yeah,
right now. Okay. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you all for coming out. If anyone who wants to see the presentation, please have a seat, and we'll get started. This is just going to be kind of a quick overview of the plan and the key points, and then we can break out and talk questions and answer and get some more perspective and input that y'all have come to share and let us know what you think about the plan. My name's Jay McLeod. I'm with a company known as Stewart. We do land use planning in small and mid-sized cities and counties around the state. We have all offices in Raleigh, Durham, Charlotte, and now Wilmington. We just opened up an office there. A small surveying crew runs out of there. But other than the planning group, there's surveyors and engineers, transportation engineers. Can you all hear me well enough without this? Okay, great. All right. Thank you for coming out. My name's Jay. This is Christy Jackson. She's with Stewart. Kathia's back there. She's with Stewart. There's Jeremy Hardison. He's the planning director. These two gentlemen are on the steering committee. And then way in the back behind the map, and you can't see his hand, is Miles. He's a town planner also. Deb's on the steering committee. I don't think you're on this. And Adam's on the steering committee. Right. I was looking behind you, but thank you for raising your hand. Right. So after this, if you have specific questions or comments, please get with one of us and let us know what you're thinking. So we can write it down and take those revisions, make them to the plan, and then before we bring it back to the planning board and council for them to consider the plan. Just kind of a little background. Back in the 70s, the federal government came up with with some legislation that basically required care to be taken of ocean and estuarine systems because they have a greater public good beyond just the private property of the people that happen to be built on them. Obviously commercial fisheries, shell fishing, scenic value, public trust access. So that kind of trickled down through the state, and we have the Coastal Area Management Act, which you'll hear me call CAMA, and you may know it by the name of CAMA. And in the North Carolina, we have a land use plan requirement for all the coastal jurisdictions, all the towns and counties within the 20 coastal counties. That's required by the state. And so one of the reasons we do a land use plan update in the coast is because whenever we want to get a CAMA permit, whether it's to dredge an inlet or expand a marina or build a bigger turnaround area like they're trying to do in Wilmington, you need a CAMA permit to do that, to make sure that the public benefits of that ocean system are balanced against the private gains of whatever action that is. And it even goes down for things like docks and bulkheads, right? Anytime you basically impact anywhere where the salt water meets the land, or places that are under the salt water too. So that's one of the reasons why we're doing a land use plan update. The other reason, and I think this is a more important reason, is because it's a time for the community to check back in with each other, make sure we're all on the same page, reassert our goals and values and what we consider important, and then kind of create a roadmap that is the community's roadmap to help guide the staff and town leadership when they need to make land use decisions and infrastructure investment decisions. Where are they going to widen the roads? Where are they going to add sidewalks? Where are they going to install bigger stormwater pipes in anticipation of higher intensity development? Or where are they going to have lower intensity development? And communicate that message from the community to the town leadership and town staff, and also to the private development community, so that everyone can be on the same page and make decisions, informed decisions that maximize their investment. So that's the reason I like to think we do land use planning, but also because the state requires it and we need CAMA permits occasionally. And for some of the bigger permits, for things like dredging inlets or maintaining marinas and stuff, we need to make sure we get those in a plan so that it streamlines that permitting process as we move forward. This planning process started back in October, and presumably will wrap up in August, September of this year. And so here's kind of where we are. We started out with a series of steps and kind of moved through those, but throughout the plan, public involvement's been a big, important part of it. We started out with stakeholder interviews. There was a survey, steering committee. There's been a website. This is part of that process, is the second public meeting. We've been gathering input throughout taking it back to our office in Raleigh, chewing through it, bringing back what we heard to the steering committee, getting direction from them where it's appropriate, then coming back to the office, massaging things a little more, coming back to a public open house meeting, checking in with the community. So a lot of that back and forth kind of iterative process of building this plan. And this is kind of that last step to make sure that the recommendations and the future land use map, the stuff that we've heard and been guided on making, is what you all understand and are behind it and support. So that's kind of where we are here. So it started with stakeholder groups, which are kind of groups of 6 to 8 people. Came down here and met for a full day, interviewed people, heard about their concerns, constraints, opportunities in the community moving forward. That kind of started the investigation. We moved to a public survey, which helped us get information about broader community values and goals and constraints. That was from late January to about mid-February. Right in the middle of that was a public open house, but that's the next slide. Steering committee's been dedicating their time and effort on a volunteer basis. They were appointed by the council, and they've been meeting and reviewing this information and making sure that what's being said is what they heard as well, and providing the guidance from their perspectives, and there are a variety of perspectives on that committee. And then we had a website that's gotten a pretty good amount of activity, and it has all the background information that we've collected and analyzed. It also has summaries of the meetings and findings, and then also the draft land use plan is on there, and I hope you all have been able to find it or heard about it before tonight. But if you haven't, that's where it is. So in the overall public input has shaped basically all aspects of this effort. And so that's a very important thrust of the Campbell land use plans. The state wanted to make sure when they established that process that public input was a major component. And so we want to make sure we honor that and make this a public process. And so last February we had that first public open house, which was to kind of gather some more ideas, collect information. This is one of the maps that showed where the major pedestrian safety improvements were warranted and pedestrian avenues. This asked residents to prioritize places that flooded a lot, places that were destinations, and then places where they thought future residential growth should be directed. So all that kind of information, plus some of the stuff like you saw right here, this development suitability map basically measures physical and economic constraints that contribute to an area being more suitable for urbanization or development. All those were data points that moved towards building that future land use map, which is that big map in the middle of the table, which talks about character of development moving forward for the next 10 or 20 years. One of the things that guides every aspect of this plan are the community's vision and the goals, and these are built in part from the previous Campbell land use plan, but also they were kind of massaged and vetted, re-vetted with the community to tweak a few things here and there, but for the most part it has not changed. I would say it's not changed much, and that's pretty typical in any community. You see that, you know, their values don't tend to swing wildly from one decade to the next. So this vision, achieving that vision and achieving these goals is basically what all the recommendations and the future land use map are built around trying to achieve. And those are in that first board right there on the right as you walk in. They were at the first public meeting, and they've been kind of modified since then, but not substantively, I would say. And they're back there. If you want to talk more about that, please come over and meet with one of us over there. The future land use map, like I said, is in the middle of the room. I want to explain real quick that a future land use map is not zoning, right? But it is one of the data points that is used by a council, and it's required by the state, by state legislation to be used by a council when they have to make a decision regarding a rezoning or a land use policy decision. Now, they don't always necessarily have to, it's not the only piece of information they use, it's one piece, and they may or may not rezone something that it either is or is not consistent with the future land use map. But this communicates the ideas of where different uses should go, what type of mixes should occur, and it is a data point that the council uses. And this should reflect the community's vision for how they would see the future mix of land uses and activity in their town. So try to think like 10 to 20 years out. I also want to say that there are some places on this future land use map where what you see is a lower intensity recommendation for a lower intensity development than what currently exists there. And that's fine. This is not zoning, right? Zoning is what determines what you can and can't build somewhere. And this would be used when someone decides to ask for a rezoning. So if, let's say you had a home in a place that was recommended for a lower intensity development, let's say you had a, whatever you have, it's more than a low intensity, and it gets wiped out in a storm, unless you decide to rezone it, zoning is what will apply to what you can build back there, okay? So I'm happy to explain that more. But it's basically that, is that zoning determines what you can and can't do with land, and this is a recommended data point for what we would like the community to morph towards in the future as buildings come and go and owners come and go and land use changes over time. So just to kind of orient you, basically the yellow and the orange and the brown, which the brown and the orange kind of look the same, but here's the brown, here's the orange, and that's the yellow. Those are kind of the residential districts, and they kind of go from low intensity in the yellow to kind of higher intensity, like apartments, condos, townhomes in the brown, potentially. That's not saying you have to build that, but it's saying that you might have that option if you rezone and you're zoned right and people agree that the time is right for that. The pink is kind of a lower intensity neighborhood commercial. You might see like at the end of your street and you're comfortable with a little restaurant being, 6, 7 doors down, you walk down there. The purple is going to be your more higher intensity mix of uses. So that's the Food Line Plaza, and across the street, that's the Publix Plaza, and across the street. This is kind of the area that you see on Lakeport Boulevard, where the buildings are kind of up close to the street, and kind of clustered around that downtown business district, which is this zone unique character area. The blue is right here. It's kind of office and employment, so it's more employment generating, not necessarily retail or recreational or restaurants, but more places of employment. So in this purple area, for instance, you also see 3 little nodes down here where there's good beach access, public parking areas, and kind of these major condo, hotel investments, and then also kind of good east-west kind of access that kind of ties into these neighborhoods. So these would be like smaller activity nodes down this way. So this is kind of how that shakes out. And these are in more description on that board there next to the future land use map. A little bit higher description. But this is kind of how this would shake out, is that as you move up kind of that ladder and you get closer to areas that are commercial or higher activity, you kind of have a little bit higher intensity of development, residential development. And the same thing kind of happens for those commercial and mixed use areas. So the business district has its own distinct character. It's very active, very walkable. The mixed use commercial is kind of that higher intensity node around the grocery stores. And the beauty of this is that you can get a mixture of hotels or recreation service restaurants. And up on Lake Park Boulevard next to those grocery stores, there's probably going to be more demand for commercial. So it can that can stay kind of commercial. But down around the central business district, around the boardwalk area, you might have more demand for residential. And that's okay, right? Because we have our business district, and then we have people that want to be near that business district because they're vacationing, or maybe they just love to party, or they just like the restaurants. And so you can kind of have that flexibility in that land use, and then let the market kind of push things one way or the other, depending on the owner and their intentions and their desires and their expectations for return on investment. And then this neighborhood commercial, like I said, is kind of like the lower level shops or restaurants or retail that you might see kind of fitting into a neighborhood and not being too intense, probably not that active at night, kind of works well in a residential setting because they're pretty low key. And then you kind of have these special districts. You have the office, industrial, and employment zone, that blue one I was talking about, kind of up around the backside of the Food Line Plaza. Recreation, conservation, and civic, that's going to cover everything from boating, the beach, so recreation, commercial water access, but also parking lots, trails, conservation areas, the state park, the buffer area, the lake and the park around it, Mike Chappelle Park. The marina is a pretty specific use. where you kind of get these higher intensity kind of waterfront dependent, sometimes industrial uses mixed in tight on the water, and we want to make sure that we can support that because it's an important part of the community, an important part of the identity and the services that are allowed back there. And then the Gateway Corridor, there was an expressed desire to have a very nice looking entrance as you come into town and maybe dress up Lake Park Boulevard, maybe enhance the landscaping, increase pedestrian facilities, and maybe work out some traffic snags that are kind of in there. So this is kind of a way to encourage that through a few small character-oriented changes that can be implemented through the land use development regulations if the town decides to pursue that. So I kind of want to walk through a few little areas to kind of give you all a feeling for what is proposed. These little red dotted lines that you'll see on there are proposed connections, whether those are bicycle, pedestrian, golf cart, pogo stick, or car, has yet to be determined. But they are areas where you could increase the connectivity of the neighborhood and the cohesiveness and the network of the system, and kind of support those land uses that are there. But for instance, this one is probably not going to happen because I was informed a gentleman just decided to build a house right in the middle of that red line. So that'll probably be 50 years in the future before you see that one come through, right? So, but again, we're looking to the future. So this is the food line area. Kind of as you come in, you see this hatched line on Lake Park Boulevard. That's the Gateway Corridor overlay. You kind of have the redevelopment here at the Publix Plaza, and that being seen as a mixed-use area where you can have a flexibility of residential, higher intensity residential, and commercial uses kind of side by side or maybe stacked. This lower intensity neighborhood commercial through the middle. You got the Towns Park right there. This green are those kind of marina opportunities, and this brown is kind of opportunity for higher intensity residential, whether it's condos or apartments, or maybe it's some sort of a interesting new approach on intracoastal vacation boat rental opportunities. But basically higher intensity residential that is then able to support here. And then you see this, I'll kind of get to this a little bit, but that's that medium density residential, which is kind of like 6,000-ish square foot lots that you see already in most of this area to begin with. Because that's actually one of the things that Carolina Beach expressed really from the start, is that they really kind of like the way it is. And they're not super excited about a big amount of change. So we just kind of want to make sure that we had a place for activity to happen, but also make sure we have a place for things to kind of stay low-key as well. On the north end, this is that low density, single family residential primarily, larger lots, 9,000 square foot or more, generally speaking. Some of these are smaller than that, and that's fine. They can stay the way they are, and they can probably be rebuilt the way they are based on the zoning. But this is basically saying that we don't want to intensify the development in this area. And that's for a number of reasons. And then up through here, you kind of have that medium density residential, which is really kind of what you already see there, right? You see townhomes and 6-pack homes, and I don't think that's the real term for them, but that's what I call buildings with 6 homes in them. But kind of that beachfront, kind of feeling that you get through there, probably a little bit more vacation homes. There's a little bit of neighborhood commercial here and here where you already have the restaurant and the pier. And then there's kind of a little public parking area there. And then Freeman Park is all that recreation, civic conservation area. It's actually some of your higher quality wetlands are back up in there, and you want to make sure you kind of protect that, as well as the dunes, the dune habitat. So the north end is pretty much saying that we want to respect what's there, but not intensify that use. This is what I'm calling the core neighborhood. I'm sorry, I couldn't think of what else to call it, so I called it the core neighborhood. But basically, it's these are the larger lot, single family residential. So you're talking about 9, 10, 12,000 square feet. The brown it was hard to find the line where exactly yellow turns to orange. Sorry, that's orange, it's not brown. But I tried to find as best I could, and we talked to the steering committee and flexed some lines where we had to kind of see where that would be. But this is kind of what's already there. It's your 6,000, 7,000, sometimes 5,000 square foot lots through here. And these maybe allow some attached homes, duplexes here and there. And then, what's that? This is about a 70-acre piece of land that is privately owned and undeveloped. The owners expressed a desire to develop that as kind of a master plan campus if the opportunity should present itself. But if that doesn't happen, it can be seen to be like that lower intensity neighborhood commercial along the frontage, and then that medium density residential in the back. And then these roads would kind of extend through, and there's some pretty big, like Cape Fear Boulevard, there's some pretty big pedestrian investments there that would tie you right back into downtown. So you kind of have that neighborhood cohesion as that area develops. The Central Business District obviously has a pretty important character. It's unique, probably up and down the east coast of North Carolina. It's probably the only place like it, I would have to say. And you kind of see that we want to preserve that and keep that character there, but then also give there an opportunity for commercial or higher intensity mix of uses, whether it's vertical or whether it's multi-family attached housing, to kind of be in that location and let people be close to what they want to be close to, which is the boardwalk and the beach in that commercial district, and support those businesses. And then you kind of see the kind of intensity kind of tapers out as you move back into that core neighborhood. So you might see some attached housing in these areas and maybe even along here. But then as you move out, it kind of goes, the intensity kind of drops off, right? And you'll notice that that orange kind of continues along the beachfront as well, which really you're already seeing those uses there too, so it's kind of just kind of preserving the status quo. On the what I'm calling the south end, you kind of have these three major investments in the hotel condo units that are there. Behind each one, the future land use map is proposing kind of a little bit of a higher intensity attached housing opportunity if these people decide to do that. And then that kind of creates its own little activity node at each location. There's good beach access and there's good public parking opportunities. So those make these kind of like little smaller little destinations that don't encroach really into the neighborhood behind them, but then still kind of provide not a bookend, but kind of like a little bit of gravity at each one of these, kind of give a little activity there and shape up the character of that area. We'll be at the future land use map. If you have comments or thoughts or ideas about that, please come back and talk to us. The other boards around the room really deal with the key policy recommendations, and those make up really the bulk of the document. And this will be information that these are recommendations. So I wanted to kind of go through these real quick. CAMA is the Coastal Area Management Act, and the planning process we're going through is a state prescribed planning process, so it's pretty rigid. And these are the buckets that they want what they call land use management topics to be in, right? So they have some goals that they want to accomplish, and they're actually paraphrased in the plan in the recommendation section. But more or less, they want to maximize public access to public trust waters, and that basically means any navigable waterway, basically, right? So the Sound, Intracoastal, and the beach. They want to maximize public access to those areas because they're held in trust by the state for the use and benefit of the public. They want to maximize land use compatibility, which is basically balancing environmental and economic concerns. So there's some recognition that there's a balance there. They want to make sure that they use public infrastructure to protect AECs, and that means areas of environmental concern. That's specific to the CAMA legislation. And it basically means wherever salt water touches earth. So you got saltwater wetlands, you've got the beachfront, where from the front of the dune to the water is public trust area of environmental concern, highly erodible area. You've got the marshes on the backside of Freeman Park, Intracoastal, the Sound, and a number of other areas, but for the most part, it's where saltwater and land touch, or where there's basically saltwater. They want to make sure that they conserve beaches and floodplains and dunes for storm protection. So natural hazard areas are a big concern. And then protect and enhance the public trust water quality. And then there's this great bucket at the end that they give us, which is called local issues of concern, where we can talk about everything else that the town actually cares about, that they would do regardless of whether or not they had a CAMA land use plan or not. Public access is back. they're not split up in these buckets back here. They're kind of grouped a little bit differently, but we can point to the specific plan recommendation for each one of these topics back there. So if you have want to learn more about it, we can go into the report itself. Oh, there are 3 copies of the report around the plan, proposed draft plan, so we can look at in more detail at each one. Please leave them though, because we didn't bring enough to share. And it's still a draft, so we're still changing it. But basically, in public access, we want to maintain marina operations and the public moorings, improve water and beach access points. Carolina Beach actually has a lot of great access points on the ocean side. Almost every street end has a CAM access point, which is great. There's probably some opportunities for maybe some canoe or kayak launches on the Sound. And then there's some access, I'd say mostly informal, along Snow's Cut. And then of course the backside is state or federally owned, so public to some extent, right? So improve water and beach access points and remain open to new opportunities for new access points. So that's not saying go out and buy properties and demolish houses and turn them into beach walkovers, but it's saying that if an opportunity presents itself, consider that, and maybe the town will act and maybe they won't. In land use compatibility, we want to make sure we are using land use map as one of the data points to make land use decisions. We want to keep looking for solutions for Canal Drive flooding, and I know there's a separate subcommittee that's working on that, and it's quite the complicated issue. We want to make sure we maximize Carolina Beach Lake for stormwater. It's probably the nicest and most loved and enjoyable stormwater pond I've ever seen in my life. It's pretty nice. And you may have noticed the town recently, they dredged the lake and then they installed larger pumps so they can maximize the storage capacity in there and use Henniker's Ditch, maintenance on Henniker's Ditch. But there's other opportunities throughout the town also to increase stormwater management, active management in other areas. And then maintain the operations at Freeman Park. The town's going to be looking to expand its public water provision infrastructure and its wastewater treatment plant infrastructure out on the Matsu property, the buffer area. Town does a great job of managing public parking in the downtown area, and want to make sure we continue to manage that public parking resource and make sure there are opportunities. We make the most of that land since it's very valuable. And there was a call to expand golf cart parking, so that made it into the plan. Golf cart community, to some extent. Natural hazard areas are tough. We want to make sure we monitor erosion and use public resources to re-nourish the beach in locations where it's appropriate. Maintain the inlet, maintain Snow's Cut. Those are important economic resources and bring a different type of tourism and income to the city, to the town. Identify current and future high hazard areas and don't allow development to intensify in areas that are vulnerable or in high hazard. Require structural elevation. I want to bring up some communities in the Outer Banks are actually getting together to agree on and exceed the FEMA flood elevation requirements. So they're going to go up to 8 feet, and the Home Builders Association is on board, and it's kind of an example of a community saying, you know, that's great that FEMA requires us to be this high, 2 feet, but we'd rather be 8 so that, because we know the storms and we know that when things come through here, it gets torn up, and we want to make sure we get back online faster. So we're going to build up above that. And so that's an opportunity, is to evaluate how high is the right amount for Carolina Beach. And then continue to be in the community rating system, which results in lower flood insurance rates as a community, and the hazard mitigation plan, which is a regional plan for hazard mitigation and evacuation response. And while we're here, I want to point this graphic out. There was some concern about this in the last session. This is, so the inlet hazard area is part of the Division of Coastal Management, state agency that implements the Coastal Area Management Act. They maintain these inlet hazard areas and regulate to some extent what goes on in them. And last year, the DCM, Division of Coastal Management, performed some studies on erosion, measured erosion, and projected erosion rates. And they are recommending that this area be expanded, basically in every inlet up and down the coast. I only printed up the one for Carolina Beach. It's back there on that table. And I encourage you to look it up online. The town has nothing to do with that. It's a state agency decision, and it's my understanding that it's going to be voted on for adoption by the Coastal Resources Commission in March. So if you have concerns about that, that's about all I can tell you. Jeremy might be able to tell you a little bit more about what happens if a home is destroyed in that area, or what the setbacks are and so forth. But basically, BCM is proposing to expand the inlet hazard area, which is the area that's vulnerable to higher erosion rates because of its proximity to the inlet. In terms of water quality, we want to continue to improve water quality and preserve the wetlands and the dunes in Freeman Park and the natural resources, reduce non-point source pollution, and increase standards for stormwater management, including public solutions. So like I said, there are probably some opportunities where some more active management could be installed, but of course, active management stormwater solutions are expensive, and I want to make sure we're making them in the right location. And so that's a separate process. We're not recommending specific locations in this plan, but that the town continue to look into that as an option in places that experience chronic flooding, like for instance, where Dow Road breaks off onto Harper Avenue, right? There's that little lowland there, and here it floods pretty easily. See, a bunch of people put dots there for flooding. That's from the public meeting. And then in terms of specific local concern, I want to make sure we're continuing to support local businesses, working on the aesthetics and appearance of Lake Park Boulevard, enhancing bicycle, pedestrian, and golf court transportation facilities. The town has a great pedestrian plan that they've been implementing and making a lot of investments in pedestrian infrastructure. And from what we heard at the public meeting, people love that, and I don't blame them. Protect the family-oriented character of the town. That was a lot of the discussion and the values that people have for the town, focused around the idea that it's a family town with family activities and family orientation. And to that effect, we noticed that vacation and seasonal homes have expanded in Carolina Beach. They've doubled since the year 2000. So we're now at a point where about 45% of the homes are seasonal vacation or second homes. And so the plan does recommend that the town evaluate options for regulation if they choose to go that route. So the plan provides a menu of options for regulating these that other towns have considered, and it suggests that they look into it. It doesn't say to regulate them or to not regulate them. Obviously, they're a valuable part of the economy, right? Because they bring tourism dollars in. But it also changes the character of a neighborhood if you're the only house on the block that lives there year-round. And that doesn't happen here yet, but it does happen in other communities along the coast. And if you don't know who your neighbor is, every other week your neighbor changes out, it changes a lot about the character of an area, and that's not necessarily family-oriented. And so we thought it was important to bring forward that menu of options. And y'all may not be aware of this either, but it's kind of interesting up in some other more tourism-oriented communities. They're having single-family homes built that are like 24 bedrooms, and they're renting them out as wedding venues and so forth. And that's hardly a single-family home, in my opinion. The fire marshal up there doesn't think so either, because they have an unsprinklered home with 24 beds in it, and potentially 40 or 50 people. So anyway, we provide a menu of options for regulating short-term rentals. Preserving Dow Road traffic flow, I talked a little bit about that with the crossovers and making sure there are no driveways on Dow Road from any new developments, so that we can kind of keep that traffic flow there, which is important. And then there's also some discussion of preserving the central business district character, the downtown area, developing more broadband infrastructure so people can have the opportunity to work and live here from their home and kind of increase that family-oriented character. And then preserve the beautiful environmental features that bring people here in the first place. Yes, sir.
Question about buried electric lines.
Ah,
I don't think you talked about that, did you?
you're right. I forgot to mention that. One of our steering committee members did a Facebook poll, and it wound up being the #1 thing people want to see is some electric lines buried. So that made it in there as well. I know the town's done some of that. It's very expensive work, but it is a recommendation to continue doing that.
Is that a town responsibility, or is that Duke Power, or a combination of both?
Typically, the way I've seen it happen in communities is with new development, you can ask them to put it underground as long as it's a standard. If you're going to retrofit a street, it typically falls on the town to do that, and it is an extremely, extremely expensive proposition. But on the other hand, when trees fall in a storm, maybe your power doesn't go out. unless it's the other 20 or 30 miles of electric line back up to the mainland where the power comes from. So anyway, that did make it in there, and this isn't saying necessarily which ones to bury next, but the town can easily prioritize and plan that. With that, in just a second here, I want to kind of break up and talk to y'all individually. There are a few more touch points for this plan before it's adopted or recommended to the Coastal Resources Commission for review. After we get your comments, and we've also gotten some comments online through the website, if we take those back and review them and make any modifications to the plan that we can, we'll be bringing this forward to the planning board and council for consideration, and then ultimately to the council for adoption. Hopefully it's September 10th, but it's of course the council's prerogative as to when they will hear items. And then in the meantime, we'll have a new draft posted on the internet, the website. So if you didn't get the website address, it's available through the town, but it is CarolinaBeachCamUpdate.com. My name's Jay. Christy's going to be available. Kathia is available. Jeremy is available. Miles is available. Also, the steering committee members around. If you're on the steering committee, please raise your hand. So a lot of steering committee members. Feel free to talk to them and get any perspective or background from them, but more importantly, share your perspectives with us. Thank you very much for your time. Before I do, does anyone have any questions about general process or any kind of like non-specific recommendation questions? Yes, sir.
I just got one question, that is, when we're talking about existing homes or condos, if there's a storm that demolished or exceeded rebuilding, or, building them back, are there potentially future limitations on if places could be rebuilt?
I'm not going to defer right away to Jeremy, but he is the planning director, and nobody knows a town's code. No one knows a town's code better than their own planner. I know that from experience. But Jeremy's right there. But basically, it depends on a number of factors. But generally speaking, if a home is demolished for any reason, rebuilding it depends on the zoning of that location. Right. Yes, ma'am.
Please forgive me because I came in just a few moments late and you might have covered this. The plan is intended to serve as a visionary instrument and cost is not considered. The cost of implementation is not considered. Is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, the budgeting and prioritization is solely within the purview of the council. And so, yeah, it can't all necessarily be accomplished in the first year or two. What's that? Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and split up. Please come find one of us and share your thoughts.